And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Xanadu Gallery's Pixelated Paintings broadcast. I'm your host, Jason Horsch, owner of Xanadu Gallery. It is Wednesday, May 11th, 2011. A pleasure to have you all in the broadcast. I want to take just a moment as we begin to go over some of the logistics of the broadcast. I know that many of you have participated in the past, but we do have many new attendees today as well. So I just want to go over the process of participation quickly. You're going to be able to participate today in a couple of different ways. First of all, you'll be able to watch the slideshow presentation, which I'm going to admit is pretty minimal in this case. But those will progress. You'll also be able to, of course, listen to the broadcast. And most importantly, you'll be able to ask questions. And there are two ways that you can do that. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll notice that there is a control panel in the GoToWebinar that they provide for the service. And there is one box that allows you to type questions in. I'll be able to see those questions and respond to them in the broadcast. Also, if you have a microphone attached to your computer, you can ask questions audibly during the question and answer period. And you can let me know that you have a question by clicking on the hand icon, a yellow hand icon that raises your hand, your virtual hand anyway, and lets me know that you have a question, and I can then unmute your microphone so that you can ask that question. The third option is to call in. There is an option to dial in on your phone and ask questions that way. I would suggest you listen to the broadcast through your computer, and then during the question and answer period, if you do want to dial in, you can switch over to the telephone mode at that point. Also, the slides for this presentation will be available for download on our website, along with a recording of the broadcast. I hope to have that up either later tonight or tomorrow as it gets processed. By way of introduction on this topic of photographing paintings, the idea for putting together this little broadcast has come from many questions that I receive from artists that I meet around the country. It is a persistent question amongst artists, how can I capture the best images for my artwork? It also frequently comes up, how do I, size my images for optimal emailing and website? And so my concept here is to give some very basics on photographing paintings. I do have some experience in this area as we started our gallery about 10 years ago. Of course, in the beginning, we were looking to do everything we could on our own, and so photography was a big part of that. And of course, the early 2000s was, certainly digital photography had been around for a while, but that was really kind of the age that everyone was shifting over from film to digital. And so we had to learn kind of from the ground up, and got some experience the good old-fashioned way. So the techniques and advice that I'm going to be sharing with you comes from my own experience, but I thought what would be a kind of a better way to discuss this would be to also bring in some experts on photography. And rather than me just lecturing on what I think might be the right way or the wrong way to photograph your paintings, I thought it'd be a great idea to bring in some experts to help us with the technical side. And what I'm hoping is that we may find that some of the things that I'm doing, there may be better ways to do them, and I'm hoping that I learn right along with you during the broadcast. And so with that, I'd like to just briefly introduce you to our panelists. We have three panelists who've been gracious enough to join us today and to share their advice. And let's see if I can get here. And I'll begin with Dave Masterson. Dave is from the Memphis area and is an independent consultant who helps artists become commercially successful. Dave uses digital photography extensively in his work with artists in terms of marketing and sales strategy and in their relationships with galleries and websites. So Dave, welcome. Are you there, Dave?
I am here, Jason. Good evening.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And then we actually are lucky enough to have two Daves here today. The other Dave is Dave Warner. He works out of Austin, Texas, and also spends part of his time in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. Has been a photographer for many of the last 30 years and has owned an art gallery in Galveston and the Austin area. For several years, he did reproduction work for artists and for the Galveston Historical Society. Dave Warner, thank you for joining us today. And Dave, are you there?
Glad to be here, Jason, and looking forward to the discussion here.
Great, thank you so much. Yep, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you. And finally, I also have with us today Bill Morse. And it looks like I'm not keeping up on my job here, throwing the slides forward. But William Morse is the owner of William Morse Edition and specializes in custom color, quad tone, black and white printing, and also does drum scanning, consulting, and basically a whole range of services in helping artists reproduce their work. And so it's a real pleasure to have him here with us. He's also a Photoshop expert and is very passionate about images. Bill, thanks for joining us. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and I'm very pleased to join you.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. And so my concept, I'm going to move forward, and initially as I was putting together the broadcast this evening, I thought that I would just kind of roll through my presentation and then at the end have an open panel session. But I think that it now makes more sense that as we go, we'll stop with each of the topics and have conversation as we go along. And again, as you're listening, as you have questions, please do type those into the question box. Or raise your hand to let me know that you have a question. And so let's begin by talking this evening the tools of the trade. And of course, I want to keep this as simple as possible for an artist. And I know that many times as an artist you work under a constrained budget and certainly have issues in terms of being able to afford expensive equipment. And so what I want to focus on this evening is giving you some tools and techniques that you can use with tools that you probably already have. And so obviously the beginning of this conversation is the digital camera. And you can very quickly start spending a lot of money on digital camera equipment. But I found that a decent quality digital camera will often get the job done, and you don't have to have spent thousands and thousands of dollars to do it. When we started our gallery 10 years ago, we had a little, a little Olympus camera. It had a fixed lens, 3.3 megapixels, and we thought that we were purchasing something that was so amazing at the time because it had those 3.3 megapixels. And of course now, that's not even the starting range for a little camera. I thought I'd go ahead and pose it to the panel at this point and ask you what you think would be a bare minimum requirement for an artist who wanted to capture images for use on a website and email. And I'll go ahead and open the microphones, and panelists, if you want to just jump in, and if you'll say your name before you start, then then we'll all know who's talking.
See how quickly.
This is Bill. I think that you sort of answered your question in the question. You said that what's the minimum for an email or for a postcard kind of thing, and basically you need enough resolution for email. You need enough resolution to sort of fill the screen. For a postcard, if it's a 6x8, you need something like 2,400 pixels wide. And beyond that, it's always useful to be able to crop, but that's the minimum.
Excellent. Either of the Daves have any comments you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, Dave Warner. I mean, I think
this is Dave in Memphis.
Go ahead, Dave in Memphis. We have a delay.
Yeah, we have just a little delay. So, Dave, if you want to go ahead, Dave
Sorry,
Masterson.
This is Dave in Memphis. Yeah, this is really a moving target. With the new point and shoots today, even the quality of the Nikon that you have up there is really rather high end as far as minimum requirements are concerned. I have clients who are consistently using decent point and shoots in a $300, $400 range and getting quite good results as long as they approach it properly. So I think the cost point continues to come down, and a typical artist does not have to spend a fortune to get good reproduction.
Excellent. And Dave Warner, we'll go to you now.
Yeah, I mean, even if you were thinking about it, you look at something like an iPhone 4 today, it's got a 5-megapixel camera in there, and as long as you've got it mounted on a tripod and you've got it parallel to your piece of work and you've got the right kind of lighting, you can get a decent image out of a camera in a cell phone. So you were talking about in the beginning, you had your 3.3 megapixel and you thought you were high on the hog. Well, you know, with an iPhone 4 today, you've got more capability in that camera than you had with that other one. So there's a lot of capability out there, and you may already have it in your hand, and you might not have to spend a ton of money.
And Dave Warner, do you feel like there is some kind of, if someone's looking to buy a new camera, do you feel like there's some minimum in terms of megapixels that they should be looking for, or other requirements?
You know, I don't think it's, I think we've gone past the megapixel kind of argument where it constantly seemed like we had to have more and more megapixels. I mean, one of the cameras I have is a Canon 5D Mark II, and it's got about 22 megapixels, but that's way overkill. I think what's more important is sharpness of the lens, ability to get a clear image, the noise, how bad the image is going to look as far as the noise reproduction that's done by the camera that you're using. So if you find an inexpensive camera that has low noise and has a really sharp lens with it, I think you can get away just fine.
Yeah, excellent. And certainly, I think this also points back to the question: what is your purpose with the photos you're trying to capture? You know, if we're trying to get something for an email or to put up on the website, you know, the camera that we use is more than adequate for that. If I'm going to be doing an advertisement in a magazine, or, you know, if an artist is looking to reproduce their work in a print format or something at a professional level, you know, that's the point where I stop trying to mess around with it and capture it myself, and I get the piece of artwork to a professional who has the equipment to do a great job reproducing the artwork. And then on the other end of the question, the other end of the equation is, of course, the software that you're using to process those images. From very early on, you know, one of the first software purchases we made at the gallery was Photoshop, and I have over the years toyed around a little bit with some other photo processing software. Photoshop just seems so far superior to me that I've never even considered not using it. And I wonder if our panelists would have an opinion on that. Are there other options, or is it just a done deal? You better do Photoshop. And I'll start with Bill.
Well, I think that one of the things that I see a lot with other artists, including clients of mine, as well as I'm in an artist building of 80 artists, and I see it a lot with colleagues especially, is they try to do color correction without using Photoshop. And inevitably, what ends up happening is, as they make the image brighter or darker, depending on what they need to do, the colors end up changing. And basically, I've found that the only way to, and really the only tool that I can consistently control both lightness and darkness and color is in Photoshop. And so when I teach photo printing, for instance, that's what I teach. That's all I teach is Photoshop.
Yeah.
And they're really, they're, you know, if you, Lightroom and even Adobe Raw, they're great for doing quick sort of newspaper. If I was a newspaper photographer, that's what I'd use. But if you're an
The
artist
quick and dirty
looking
stuff.
if you're an artist looking to reproduce your color, there really is, in my experience, only one tool.
Dave Masterson, agree?
Yes and no. Philosophically, if an artist is going to own work, my experience is they don't have the time and inclination for the learning or the skill set required for Photoshop. I've had clients get pretty darn good results with products like Photoscape or Paint.net or even GIMP in the open source arena. that would cost you absolutely nothing. Beyond those tools, if an artist wants to increase that, then yes, certainly go ahead and progress up to Photoshop. But you don't need it typically to get good color balance to reflect your watercolor or your oil or your textures if you shoot it properly. So I think it's all over the board depending on what the individual wants to invest in time and effort. And there's some very low expense and even free applications out there that will get you into juried shows as long as you have calibrated monitors and do it right.
Excellent. And Dave Warner, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's truth in what both Bill and Dave said, and I think it comes down to, I think Bill had mentioned, you know, what do you intend to do with the work? That's one of the things, but if you're an artist, typically you're broke. And
Yep.
so you've got to look at what can I use? How can I get an acceptable result for the minimal amount of investment? And so if you have that iPhone or if you have a small point and shoot, then maybe you look at something like Elements, which is a subset of Photoshop, and it does a pretty good job. And then you spend a little bit of money on something to actually correct the color on your monitor so that what you're seeing is what you're actually printing out, and you're able to do actually a profile. And I think with that, you keep your investments under $1,000 and you're in good shape. When you start anything beyond that, you start talking about real money real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that is excellent advice, and you know, in addition to the, obviously we mentioned the cost of Photoshop, there is definitely that learning curve, and it seems like you could very quickly start to spend a lot of time in Photoshop. So that's great advice, and I appreciate you sharing that. Now, in terms of techniques, now you're going to see how raw we are in the gallery and shooting photos, and again, we're thinking of, you know, what are we trying to accomplish here? We're trying to get a good reproduction of the artwork. You know, sometimes it has to be done fairly quickly. And so our basic technique for shooting is to shoot outside, and I can almost hear photographers cringing at the thought of this. But, you know, we don't have lights set up. We don't have the space to set up a studio in the gallery per se. And so we've had to come up with a technique that allows us to do some guerrilla shooting, in essence, and shoot outside. So what we found that works for us, we've experimented with all different times of day and different sunlight, and we found that if we get outside and shoot in the morning hours, we get the best light between 9 and 11 a.m. Of course, we're in Scottsdale, Arizona. We always have sunshine. That might not be an option if you're in the Northwest and always have the cloud. And we always shoot it at a little bit of an angle to reduce glare. So I'll show you just a couple of quick images of how we do that. We also always set our camera to shoot at the highest possible quality that it can capture, knowing that we can always downsize those images as we need to. But I found that a lot of artists, you know, don't necessarily understand some of the settings in terms of quality on their camera. And so that would be one of the very first things that you'd want to do, is make sure that you have your quality settings on your photo set up correctly. So you can see on your image now our basic technique for shooting a piece of artwork. Oh, but I've got some sound coming in. Sorry. Let me just mute real quick. And basically, we'll set it up at an angle. We'll shoot, and this tends to reduce the glare for us. If I'm shooting a piece that has glass on it, we've found a technique that works pretty well for us. And again, it's very much a guerrilla technique, and that is that we'll set the piece of artwork up on the shadow line. Basically, the first shot you're going to see is one that we shot in full sunlight, and if you look closely, it might be a little hard to see as small as this image is, but you can see my reflection pretty clearly in the glass. But then when we set up on a shadow line near our gallery, you can see my gallery director assisting me in this, and then shoot from the shadow line, we found that reduces any glare and reflection that we get in the artwork. And so I'd love to open this up now to the panel and have them comment on the techniques that we use, and maybe make suggestions that an artist could use if they don't want to do the guerrilla techniques, if they want to get a little bit more professional, or if you're shooting down and dirty, what are some good ways to do that? And I'll go in reverse order this time. Let me start with Dave Warner and your thoughts.
Darn, so I can't nap anymore and listen to the rest, huh?
That's right.
Well, I would actually argue against shooting in bright sunlight, and I think that the guy that's up in the Northwest, if he had a bright overcast day, as a photographer and you're doing landscape work, you get some of the best saturated colors with no reflections on an overcast day. So I don't think that's a bad thing to be shooting in that kind of
in the cloud.
Yeah, I think that on a sunny day, if you've got a real glossy surface, you're going to get some of those highlights picked up, and little when you blow it up, you see these little points of white, and you end up in Photoshop trying to touch all of those things up and get them out.
Absolutely, and we do run into that sometimes. I guess our problem is that if we waited for a cloudy day, we'd be waiting a long time.
Well, what you could do, Jason, is, had you ever thought about just taking a white reflector? They are pretty huge, and you could put it directly over the top of that, which would stop direct sunlight from coming down on that piece, and mute the sun a little bit, tone it down a little bit. That might help you get kind of that bright overcast look.
Great suggestion. We'll have to give that a shot. Let me go to Dave Masterson and your thoughts. What would an artist do if they're trying to capture artwork on a budget?
I like Dave's idea. I would definitely go with, if you're going to shoot outside in that environment, get the light to be indirect. I would also go with it shaded. Of course, in your illustration, the contrast on your shade is very, very high. But if you had a white diffuser above the piece of art to diffuse that sun, I would eliminate a lot of the reflection issues, and the light would be soft enough that the color balance should be good. Because our weather varies quite a bit here, color balance is always an issue for us, and we've got to be very careful about camera settings in that situation if we're shooting it in indirect light. We tend to use a lot of outside stuff, but in indirect light if the temperature is suitable. But in the winter here, it's very damp and it's cold, and you can start even getting distortion on the artist's canvas and stuff like that outside. So we have to be a little more careful environmentally.
Excellent, excellent. And Bill, maybe you could answer the question, what if you did want to do a setup in your studio? What would be the best setup for doing that? Oh, and I'm wondering if I've lost Bill. Well, let me throw it back to either of the Daves then. Oh, yeah, there we go, Bill. I think I've got you now.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to add in terms of shooting outside that I've seen a lot of artists, and I've done this myself as well, basically use large white sheets of foam core. Half-inch or is best, but even 3/8-inch foam core, you can basically make a reflecting box around the piece of art, and that controls the light that's falling on it. And essentially, I use the same technique in the studio, which is to say, I put the piece of artwork up on the wall. I will put large, 40 by 60 sheets of foam core, depending on the size of the piece of art, obviously, below the art, on both sides of it, and sometimes above. And then the lights are reflecting off of those pieces of foam core. And the key thing, I think, that the other people mentioned as well is getting an even distribution of light across the entire canvas, because if one corner of it in the photograph is white and the other corner, which should be white, is a dark gray or a light gray, you're going to have trouble getting a good result. At that point, you've added much, much more work for yourself.
Excellent. Well, that's terrific, and I feel like I said, I'm learning things here, so that's great. Now, in terms of working with the image in Photoshop and processing it, that could almost take we could probably spend days on that process, and I thought what I would do again is just show you our basic process by bringing up one of these images that we've shot here, and this is going to take a moment to come up. But basically our process then for sizing the piece is to come in, and I just use the selection tool, and you're going to see I'm down and dirty here as well. I'm off angle a little bit, so I'm going to be losing some of my edges. and again, I can hear the photographers shuddering as they see this. But
we're shuddering.
I know you are. I know you are. And
yeah.
Had we ever mentioned, Jason, that you need to be parallel to the piece of artwork?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh, okay, just wondering.
And so you'll see again in my instance where I'm looking for something quick. I found that if I lose an edge of a painting, I'm not going to panic, and sometimes we'll do a little bit of adjustment, skewing the piece to match up. But for my purposes, for sending an image to a client via email, what I've cropped here is going to be sufficient to show them what they need to see with the artwork and get that image in front of them. Obviously, if I'm going to be doing an advertisement again or reproducing the piece, then I'm going to want a professional to come in and shoot the piece for us. Now, in terms of sizing the images, this is, and I really want to open this up to the panel. This is the area certainly where we have the most questions and concerns from artists. Knowing the difference between the different resolution settings in Photoshop, the difference between 300 DPI and 7200 and 400 pixels, that all sounds like a foreign language to someone who's starting out in this process. For formatting images for email, we will, or for our website for that matter, we'll set our size settings to about 600 pixels wide and 72 DPI. Would the panel members agree that that's a pretty good setting for websites and for email, or would you have other suggestions? Let me start with you, Bill.
Well, if what you're talking about is a certain number of pixels wide, then the DPI is essentially irrelevant. The key thing here is what's the size of the image in pixels. And if you're doing a website, a lot of web pages are 1,200 or 1,600 pixels wide. Maybe you need if you're going to have a full-size image, maybe you need a 1,200 or 1,600 pixel wide image. If not, if it's, if you're doing for a 17-inch monitor or something like that, then 600 is probably a little small, but you can certainly start with that, and you may find that you need 1,000 or something in between. But for the purposes of sizing it, the DPI is in fact irrelevant.
Excellent. And Dave Masterson.
I agree. Focus on pixels and don't let the printing stuff and other dimensions confuse the issue. Obviously, if you're just going to do thumbnails, do 160 by 108 or something in that area. A little larger for website, 240 by 160, or all the way up to 460 by 300, depending on what aspect ratio you shot it in. But it's all over the board. It used to be very, very standardized in the very small thumbnail sizes, but with more and more clients now being on broadband connections, the load speed, the download speed is becoming less of an issue, and artists can get much higher resolution images up now, especially if they show a panel of thumbnails that somebody can then click on to see the full impact or large image, which a lot of our clients tend to do. So I agree. I think we ought to just stay with a single dimension, and in a web environment, that's pixels by pixels, and maintain the ratio between those in however the image was shot, and go with something around 160 by 100 for thumbnails, up around 240 by 160 or 460 by 300 for larger images.
Great. And Dave Warner, I often will receive emails from artists who are sending me images of their artwork, and I'll open the image, and I'm seeing a tiny little corner of the piece of artwork. What have they done incorrectly?
I have no idea. I was all ready to talk about what Bill and Dave Masterson said.
I thought I'd throw you a curveball.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I do think that there is something to be said. I mean, we make it, we make an assumption that everybody has broadband and that these aren't issues anymore, but the size change came about because the monitors kept getting better. We were on 640 by 480, then we were 800 by 600 resolution on the monitors, then 1024 768, and it just kept going up. And so we were able to make the images larger on the boundary sizes. But I think that you still have to think about what's called the dots per inch, which is typically 72, then 96, and then you go all the way up to print and size, 240, 300, 340. I think you still have to look at that because there is a significant amount of the population out there that still has dial-up, believe it or not, or satellite if they're in rural areas, and it is not broadband at all. And I know well about that in the Adirondacks. So it's broadband is not as out there as you might think. If they sent you something and you're only seeing a portion like that, are you able to resize it?
Yeah, it always is that issue that I have to open it up in Photoshop then and size it down. But sometimes it's amazing. It seems like if I were to be able to have a monitor the right size to see this piece, that monitor would have to be 6 feet wide and 4 feet tall to be able to see the whole image.
My assumption would be that they're not changing whenever they're doing that they're using inches, real inches, instead of pixels, and they're not thinking that through. It's real easy. A lot of times the default on Photoshop and others are for inches, and so they look at that and then they go, well, I want him to see as much as he can, and so I'm going to make this thing 12 inches by 16 inches or 16 by 20, like it's going to be a printed frame.
And then maybe they're setting the setting at 300 DPI or something like that.
And when you do that, you pop on that thing. It's going to, if depending on the resolution of your screen, part of it's going to go off your screen.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we have many questions coming in, and I kind of want to jump into some of those questions, and there's certainly no way in the time that we have allotted that we can get to all of them. But this question comes from Rose James, and that is, why would you use a digital camera or photography rather than a flatbed scanner? And I'll let any one of you that want to take that question take it.
Because a flatbed scanner that would, depending on the size of the image, the typical household flatbed scanner is going to only handle small-sized art. If you start getting into larger pieces where you're doing 24 or 24 by 36 or on up, and the pieces you're showing are not small, then those flatbed scanners start getting more and more expensive.
Excellent. Let's go to a question, and if you are if you're an attendee and have questions, I'm going to go ahead. I know a lot of you have already raised your hands, but you were raising those during the course of things, so I want to give you a chance if your question was answered or if you want to ask again. I'm going to put all of your hands down. Go ahead and re-raise your hand, and I'll bring you into the conversation at this point. And let me go to, let's see if I can get Joyce Wines on the line with us. Joyce, are you there? Do you have a question?
Yes. Well, actually, I just have a comment. Because I do a lot of graphic design also, in addition to the fine art, I use DPI all the time. So what I do when I bring my artwork to a professional photographer, I have them shoot it at 300 DPI. High resolution in case I need to do it in print. And then I bring it home and I make different files for JPEGs, for large JPEG, medium-sized JPEG, and small JPEG. And that way I always have something available right from the start.
Yeah, excellent, and I think that's great advice, and that's almost exactly what we will do. When we have a piece of artwork shot professionally, we'll bring in the native file, which is much larger, and then save out the files. And obviously, on our website, we have certain profiles for our thumbnails and images that we're using. So we have presets in Photoshop that will size things for us and take care of that resolution. Great advice, though. Let me go to Diane Nelson. Diane, are you there? Do you have a question?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Diane.
Okay. Could you ask the panelists to explain what they mean by a digital camera that has low noise and how you know it has low noise?
Great. That's a great question. I'll go to the panel with that.
Well, I think I was the only one that mentioned it, so I probably should answer.
Sure.
On your cameras, you have what used to be what they called ASA, and now it's an ISO setting on your camera. And the lower the number that you're going to see on there, which may be 50 or 100, the less noise you're going to have in that image. And what that is it's kind of an artifacting where you start to see the red, green, and blue dots. And the higher you go with that setting on your camera, because a lot of times if you don't have enough light, you start turning that dial up to 200 or 400 or 800. And the higher you get that number in order to compensate for getting enough light into the sensor on the back of the camera in order to get a good image, the more noise you start to bring in, and the more, I don't want to say pixelated, it looks noisy. It looks almost like grain, the old film grain that we had when we had cameras that, where you were taking a night shot and you were using film and you see this kind of pixelated kind of look to it. You'll get a lot of that. So you want to read up on the camera that you're getting to see how well it does in the noise area. That's why I brought that subject up, because I thought a lot of people might get a really cheap camera and it just does a horrible job with the noise, and that'd be an issue.
Excellent. Great discussion. Let me go to Clifford Riley. Clifford, are you there? Do you have a question? And looks like I've got Clifford here, but I may not be able to get him in. Let's go to Marla Riperda. I hope I'm saying your name right. Marla, are you there? Do you have a question?
That's very good, yes. I've been using Photoshop Elements, and I've gone to a workshop for Photoshop, the big program, and I'm just wondering if there's any input that you could give us, whether I should spend the money on the very expensive Photoshop program, or if they know anything about Elements, because it has worked well for what I've done thus far in my career.
Yeah, I think that speaks back to the discussion that we had, that it does depend on what your needs are. And I would, I do have a tendency to say if something's working for you and it's meeting your needs, don't go to the expense and the investment, to try and upgrade if you're not going to get that much advantage from it. And I'll let any of the panelists who want to jump in on that.
This is Dave in Memphis. I agree. I have clients who have been using Elements for years, and about every time the big application comes out with a revision, they reevaluate whether they should upgrade or not. And time again, they decide not to. I have other clients running Photoscape and some of the other applications who legitimately about once a year reevaluate their decision and look at Photoshop and decide not to go there. Then obviously there are people whose environments aren't changing and they decide they do need that extra functionality and the headaches and the learning curve that goes with it, and they make the decision. So Jason, I am kind of echoing your comment. I believe it depends on what the artist wants, where they're going with their images, and the functionality they need. If you don't need that high-end functionality, then I'm with Jason. Don't spend the money and don't bother learning it.
Excellent. And let me go to Ron Orlando. Ron, are you there? Do you have a question? Ron, I think you're there. Maybe not. And let me go to Diane. Diane, and I've had you on a broadcast before, and I'm still incapable of saying your last name. Diane, C-Z-A-J, and then lots of other consonants.
Hi, Jason. It's Diane Chakowski.
Diane, someday I will get that right.
Yeah, me too. I always say when you leave home, you check your house key. So check house key.
Got it. Got it.
My question is, I'm looking. I had an AE1 film camera, a Canon, a long time ago, and then I switched to smaller digital cameras. But I would like to upgrade to a better camera so I can actually blow up my work when I do my pictures. I like to make them big. I'm also an artist, and I'd like to shoot my own artwork and have them blown up. And the other part of the question is the studio lighting. What's best, and where's a good place to start looking to purchase the cameras?
Okay, excellent. So, I think that the basic question is, if you do have some funds available and have a budget available, and you could kind of set up the dream scenario for an artist, what would you panelists suggest that an artist start looking at?
So money's not an option? Is that
Money's not an issue for us. We've saved our pennies and come up with the funds we need to purchase the dream setup for an artist.
Oh my God, that's scary. They could spend 20, 30,000 here. We could just.
All right, let's keep it under let's keep it under 2,500.
2,500. Okay. I think I'm a Canon person, so I'm not going to comment about the Nikon type cameras, but the T3i, Canon T3i, is a good body for about $700-800. You can find it at B&H Photo and Video. That's typically where I get all of my photography equipment, and they have good pricing, good delivery, customer service is great. Amazon has, if you're used to Amazon, they have camera equipment there as well. But I would stay with the big dogs, stay away from what they call the gray market, and I would spend my money on a really good lens. After that, not the kit lens that comes with any kind of a low-end camera, but get something a little bit better, because what you spend on that lens is going to translate into a better quality image. And the kit lenses are usually not that good. So that's where I'd start on that end.
Excellent. Dave or Bill?
This is Dave. I would offer that any mid-platform quality camera, Canon, Nikon, Sony, mid-range, spend the money on the glass, spend the money on the lens, and you will be able to do anything you ever need to do as far as reproducing normal two-dimensional artwork.
Excellent. And Bill, do you have any thoughts?
I think Bill is muted there, Jason.
Oh, it looks like, it may be that we've lost his phone, actually. Yeah, it does. So unfortunately, we'll have to move on. And we are quickly running out of time for this session. I do see a ton of other questions that have come in, but unfortunately we are going to have to wrap it up. I am going to post a copy of this session on our website this evening for you to reference back to. I'll also post information on our panelists who've participated. I thank you all so much for participating and for your inputs today, and we'll look forward to having you all in future sessions.